So, there, can you see me? I wanted to talk a little bit today about this historical moment, which I find very interesting because, well, even just looking at today itself, this month is Black History Month. And of course, one of the icons I like to celebrate in Black History Month, and this year my theme is Love in Action. Is, of course, the great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I was recently reading a portion of his book, Strength to Love, not Courage to Love, yeah, Strength to Love. And I begin with, of course, the foreword, in which was printed in the 1981 printing, but of course the book came out during the man's life. It was one of his, wasn't his first book, I think. Yeah, of course, the letter, Why We Can't Wait had come out years earlier, and I've done excerpts of that reading. That was from Go, I remember, because it was the first time I'd read, and I had a original copy. But Strength to Love, I have a new, glossy, shiny copy, and I treasure it. And what she says is, well, I'll talk about what she says later, but what I think it's important to understand in this historical moment and in this month of love is that to hear how she, who loved him so greatly and so deeply, um, in many layered ways, because of course she is his was his intimate partner, the mother of their children, but then of course she went on to live in his legacy, but of course create her own. And we saw how that really flourished and unfolded into a broader understanding of human rights. And I think that that is the key thing that we see that we cannot deny in this historical moment when we look at what sustained those people at that time, and so I just want to look at then and now, what's different now, and what was so transformational about that era and time in our nation is now we have so much more information. The American dream, the bubble has been burst. The bubble of, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, the dream of everybody can, well, if you want to work, you can have a job. And we just know for a fact, we've known it intuitively in many ways, but we know for a fact now, just because there's much more evidence to prove in so many different ways, but even circulating in the media, um, the fact that there aren't enough jobs where people need them and are trained to do them. And we, the people, do have a role in producing the circumstances that allow people to work. And not only do we have that, not only is the reality of the American dream built on accessing work, but that working conditions be good, that employees have a say in their working conditions, their hours, that wages are fair. And by fair, I think, of course, we would assume that that means not just having someone at a survival level, but really having the dignity to live. And much of the work that is available now, the little work that is, and I realize parts of the economy are growing in certain places, but what the Occupy movement and what many movements around the world that are effectively based on poverty, if you really look at the core of what people are talking about in the Arab Spring, for example, even what's going on in Nigeria now, it's people's access to basic commodities and goods, people's right to vote, and this is why I think that it's prudent and impertinent and pressing the Occupy movement align itself with those movements, because they are even in times and in places where they don't even have a right to just be there. I mean, the Occupy movement, we've seen the horrendous things that have been done to people by police forces. And that's something that's common with the civil rights movement, of course, to a much lesser degree, because we have that experience and we've learned from it and built from it, and how to hopefully treat each other better as citizens. But what we also have now is this incongruency with how we live here and the rights just to protest. What I'm saying is just to protest. We're not picking sides. We're not choosing, who should be the next leader in the ways that we've done in dastardly ways before. We're saying that do the people have the right to just, assemble, which is a constitutional right that we have in America, which is not one shared, and even throughout every democracy. So I think that's something that we have to be very careful about when we understand this historical moment. But tying that back to the American dream is this idea that we know this. We know all of this. We see it now. We cannot deny in the very same ways that the images during the civil rights movement of people being denied the right to, integrate places that the federal government had integrated, for example, just to cite one example, the Freedom Riders. Or challenge the morality of existing laws, such as the case of desegregating public transport, public schools, public facilities. But the bottom line of it, and this is what people really need to understand about the civil rights movement, it was not about racial justice purely. As people always say, Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated at a time when he started protesting the war. And it's crucial to understand that that was, and had always been in a relationship to poverty and how poor people were exploited through the military-industrial complex, but also, as a consistent man he was, also on the ground there where he was assassinated in Memphis, for what? People with the placards that say, "I'm man," declaring not just, you can't just call me boy, but you can't also treat me like you would treat a child worker. You can't just pay me whatever. You can't just, close the factory, open the factory, do this, do that, or whatever the, office setting might be. It was a labor movement. So at the core of it, the civil rights movement was about poverty and shifting out of poverty by allowing workers to access, to unionize. There, I said it. So that's what we need to see the civil rights movement as. And what we have now in the wake, and this is what ties us back to this historical moment, is us. Not only do we have, we're the post-civil rights people, right? So we have those lessons, even those tactics, and in all its totality, all that we can learn and continue to learn from the civil rights era. But we also have our own hedonistic culture. And I'll just put this placard out there. Our Hollywood and our music industry is about the thug image. So again, you see the even the iconography of poverty exploited, both obviously in music with the hip hop thug and his female counterpart, his bitch. As the one of the kind of dominant icons, or the pole dancer herself. Every woman out there trying to be a blonde pole dancer. So you see this woman horde playing out in the music industry, and in the Hollywood culture. You see the iconic hero who comes in to save the day and always gets the woman, and in between he might save the world. So I mean, really, it's just that dream, feeding that dream that anybody can make it. And the hedonist thread of it is so overwhelming that we watch them both, and no wonder that that the vampire finally, out of all of this, comes just just feed on their blood, just forget throwing their bodies around with these stereotypes, these images of actual people that are on that are projected onto our screens, that are reflections of our fantasies, that they are so hedonistic and that we literally feast on it. They are the wealthiest icons on the globe. And of course, Michael Jackson is just the pinnacle of that, the example of both the ironies of making even critical music, but also, great pop music. And at the same time, how far we can really mirror that, project that damaged culture onto ourselves, onto our own bodies. So when I say, you have the pole dancers and the women, literally who want to shape themselves as pole dancers, mentally and physically, the men who want to shape themselves as thugs mentally and physically, um, and dress and talk and everything. Well, it's a way of exporting poverty in the very same way that the kind of bombed out culture of the '60s, the whole jeans and the dread, and I don't mean black people dread, I mean white people just kind of let it just go, kind of look, the proletariat look. These are ways of exploiting, trying to in some ways in dialogue with, maybe even build some solidarity with the poor, but it's not really mediated by anything critical, and that's what we're really getting down to here is that in this historical moment, I keep getting back to that, we're so socially interconnected, and by that I do mean the media, the Mr. Zuckerberg's creation, Facebook, YouTube, Google. I mean, just we have access to so many more lives and bodies of knowledge that it doesn't mean it doesn't mean that everyone's suddenly so worldly and global, but it means that the competition for ideas, the pool of ideas, is much wider, and so it's much more difficult to sustain fundamentalism. Period. That's this historical moment. So what we've got to do is build on it. We do have to organize. And then we understand that it doesn't just have to be around money or even about money. Because it's not about get money, I'm going to get mine, you got to get yours. We know that that's just the fantasy world, where we can live out those fantasies in the fantasy world, but just leave them there. The same way that people do other forms of pornography. That's poverty porn. People have sexual porn. Do that, but don't let that consume also your politics of the body. We certainly say on one hand people should have the freedom to practice S&M, but we wouldn't want the politics of dominance and subordination to dominate even that person's politics. We almost assume that they wouldn't. Oh, that's separate. But actually, lo and behold, we do live in a body politic that is about dominance and subordination, not about dialogue and cooperation. And we just see that in how incredibly bipartisan our government functions. Occupy.